Welcome back, everybody. It's two guys, and there's your stack of comics back there. I'm Mike. That's Reed, and welcome back to another video. Um, Today, we're going to discuss you. And if you watch this channel, you know Reed and I are big DC fans, and we're going to discuss today why we think the DC cinematic universe kind of failed and where it went wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and it was sad for us, right? Because
Hmm.
I think you and I were probably both a little bit jealous when and excited, of course, when all the Marvel movies started coming out and the huge success that Marvel had. And I can't really put into words how excited I was for, oh my gosh, if Marvel's doing this good, DC is going to come out with some great hits too. I mean, this is going
Yep.
to be amazing. Like, as a DC fan, we just so were, a little bit jealous, but excited for what DC's answer was going to be to, like,
Marvel.
oh yeah, if Marvel movies are doing this good, we're going to have, like, some awesome, and maybe there'll be a Flash movie. As a Flash fan, that
Yeah.
like, uh, we were
No,
so
I think the interesting thing about this is, me and you became friends about a decade ago. It was
Mhm.
right around the time the DCEU started. And I remember Marvel had been blown up. We were part of a group of comic fans who would talk about these movies and go see them together. And
Yeah,
I remember, I think as a group, we saw, it might have been Avengers or Age of Ultron together.
yeah,
And I remember seeing that. And DC had just done like Man of Steel. And we're like, man, just wait till the Justice League movie comes out.
yeah, yeah.
Little did we know how wrong we were about what that would do. So I think the hard part is for years at the start, I was nah, it's still okay. DC's still making money. We'll hit and now we're sitting in 2023. It's very apparent DCEU failed.
It's,
Marvel won that
it
one.
didn't quite happen. And
And
I kind of have to, like, as a parallel, you go back to the comic books, and um, Marvel used to chase DC in the comic books, in the comic book world.
yeah,
All through the 50s and the 60s, Marvel was kind of like always chasing DC, trying to get to those sales, trying to get the big hit. They eventually caught DC and surpassed them.
yeah,
But the same thing in reverse when it went for the movies. DC was always kind of chasing Marvel.
yeah. I think if we talk about why this failed, I think. The biggest single reason I think is the presence of Kevin Feige at Marvel and the lack of a Kevin Feige at DC. DC always seemed to be trying to make up what they were going to do as they went. And I think you look at their first few movies, it's the kind of perfect example in that you look at Marvel, there was a very clear structure. There is Iron Man, and then we're going to do a sequel to Iron Man that will introduce some other characters and kind of tease Thor, and then here's a Thor movie, and then here's a Captain America movie, and now we'll team them all up together. DC, you got Man of Steel, and then you got Batman versus Superman, which was an awful movie, but I understood that movie being next. And then they're like Suicide Squad. And it's like, wait a second, you haven't even introduced the heroes who would have stopped the Suicide Squad yet, and yet the Suicide Squad's there. Then you get a Wonder Woman movie set in the past, and then because you killed Superman, you get Justice League with no Superman. And so it's kind of the main character they had of the first phase of DC was Superman, but he's dead for your big team up movie. It was just it was such a lack of plan. I think Suicide Squad was completely, you could tell DC was like, we want to do a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy. And instead of doing what Marvel did and finding a team that mode fits, they just let's throw some cool music and a bunch of characters together and they're quirky too. And it never worked. And I think the other part is they never really identified why their movies didn't work. They just started changing things to change things. Like,
Yeah, it was the spaghetti thrown at the wall kind of thing. Let's see if we can find something that sticks. And nothing really stuck. And it was heartbreaking as a fan for it to see it fall apart the way it did, because we, as DC fans, we knew how much potential was there.
yeah.
There's so much depth and storytelling that could have been done.
Oh,
If
as witnessed by the DC animated universe, which
Yeah,
did what the movies did, just infinitely better.
Yeah,
Um,
and you kept thinking that like, oh, that's okay. Well, maybe they can introduce this character and it'll go right. Like they did so well with Aquaman, they did really well with Wonder Woman. I mean, there are very few times when you go to a movie and I've said this before, but at the end of the movie, the audience gets up and applauds at a motion picture film. That's kind of unusual.
yeah,
You know, I wasn't in the premiere, or I didn't go see premiere weekend Wonder Woman. I saw Wonder Woman to a packed house, like maybe week 2 or week 3, and they all stood up and applauded at the end of the
yeah,
Wonder Woman movie. So they did have some successes, but trying to get it all to come together and catch lightning in a bottle like Marvel did, it just fell apart because, it felt like they were just throwing things together.
yeah. Well, and I have to say, I think, one of the things Marvel did that was really smart. Feige's a comic book guy, and I think while he knew to change some, and I think he's failing a bit now, but for the first decade of Marvel, he knew the essential elements. If you boiled Iron Man down into a character, it would be largely what you got on screen. Captain America, Thor, kind of the same thing. DC hired people who I think could give a rip about the comics. Zack Snyder, while I think he's got some value as a director, he never liked Superman, and yet they let him make Superman. They let him make his vision, and instead of a hopeful, inspiring character like Superman should be, we got some isolated, torn between two cultures, wannabe space Jesus
Yeah,
story. Batman, instead of being a very driven, determined guy with a strict moral code, Batman's gunning people down like he's the Punisher and branding people. And so I think what they ended up doing is they just, even the hardcore fans couldn't get behind these movies.
it was
Yeah,
tough.
I remember as a Batman fan going to see Batman versus Superman and just being like defeated after it was over because it was like, what was that? Like, how did you? Because I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever been as hyped going into a movie as I was Batman versus Superman. We talked about that a little bit before.
Yeah,
And then afterwards, man, I felt like a balloon that someone had just popped. Like, why? Like, why did you make the decisions you made with this? And, then you go into Justice League where you get awful CGI, character arcs that don't make sense. I mean, it just, and then I think the thing is, when a movie didn't fail, instead of them looking and going, geez, no one liked super murder, torture Batman. What we could write a good Batman story, they're like, nope, it was Ben Affleck's fault. So we're just going to be done with Ben Affleck. Like, no one likes our isolated, tortured space Jesus Superman. That must be Henry Cavill's fault. We're going to fire him. And it's like, no, it was never Cavill. It was never Affleck. It was never Gal Gadot or anyone's fault. You guys wrote awful movies. And then these actors who we actually liked, you kind of pinned the failure on them and then moved on. And that lack of a plan, that lack of people who loved these characters being behind it, I think just showed why it failed. And when you talked about a couple of the successes, Wonder Woman, one, I think not only culturally was that significant because it was the first kind of modern big budget superhero film with a female character, but you had a director like Patty Jenkins who really cared and
she
wanted that to be
loved that
great.
character.
She
Yeah,
didn't want Wonder Woman to just be this, okay, random face, Amazonian who kills people. She wrote a story that was very tailored towards Wonder Woman. That's why that worked. When you look at the Aquaman film, what I think that one worked is they knew it's Aquaman. Let's just have dumb fun. Let's just
yeah,
make a fun, crazy action adventure movie that just embraces what it is. We're not trying to win an Oscar. Let's
yeah.
just have an underwater fight scene to do it. And they embraced that. And I feel like part of where DC got lost, I think the origins of why this happened is Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy was a rare moment in time. And we say this expression a lot, but it truly was lightning in a bottle. You have a uniquely talented director in Christopher Nolan, who probably one of the best directors that we have, who writes a perfect story with his brother, and I think there was David Goyer, for the right character who fits that tone. It was a perfect marriage. DC got the lesson out of that is people like dark stories. It's like, no, we like well executed stories. You
Yeah.
need a dark, depressing Superman. You needed something that matched that tone wise. And the other ones I think that worked, I thought Shazam, I thought the first Shazam worked really well. And again, because it embraced what Shazam is, it's a child wish fulfillment thing. What would happen if you were 11 and could turn into Superman?
Yeah. Yeah.
It understood that, and it wasn't trying to. I think that's the other thing is DC got this vision of like, we'll make these auteur-driven films that were the movies for adults, and it's like that only works if you got Nolan or you get a great director. When you hire some of these these Zack Snyders, it's like, no, he can't make those movies.
I think the guys
You don't
like,
even have fun with him.
I think I think the movie making folks that, and I don't know their names or what have you, but I think the movie making folks kind of looked at the comic book culture and landscape in general and tried to dark wash it, like DC does well because it is dark and it's more adult. And so we're going to take this paintbrush and just paint everything dark. Oh, that works well for Batman. But like you said, it's completely out of character with Superman. And, they look at, Alan Moore and the Watchmen and the Dark Knight trilogy, the Frank Miller.
Yeah,
They think, oh, okay, yeah, that's when comic books became relevant for adults. And so let's go there. And Marvel didn't look at it that way. They're like, yeah, they took their characters. I mean, Frank Miller wrote, Dark Daredevil,
Daredevil. Yeah,
and they took their characters into dark places. But when they went to make a movie, they broadened that lens and embraced a lot of the fun that comics have.
yeah.
And
I mean, what a novel concept that like, hey, kids might like to see some of these movies and have fun. And
yeah,
and I think that's the other thing that DC failed at, and it was so interesting in that we've seen DC succeed in that my kids watching the Justice League cartoon, the classic one from early 2000s, they're so glued to that series. They love like I've had a 14-year-old, I've had a couple of nieces and nephews, I have a 2-year-old now. They absolutely love watching that cartoon just across generation because it's fun and it's bright and it's colorful. Yeah, there's some ideas that are a little dark in there, but they just have so much fun with it. DC, the biggest thing I saw, even as an adult, I didn't have fun watching their movies. You just would walk out and you're like, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but like, man, like I didn't leave the theater like, man, let's go see that again. Even when I enjoyed some of it, was more like, okay, like I get what you were trying to do, but whereas
and
Marvel, you'd finish and it was like, man, that was really fun, and the kids are energetic, and they're talking about the movie the whole way through home, and hey, like, can we go buy some toys and stuff like that? And it's
yeah.
DC just didn't have that. Like, kids didn't see Batman trying to murder Superman with a spear and instantly go like, let's go get the action figures.
It
It
was
just
sad.
it didn't work, man.
It was really sad that it went that way. And yeah, if you want to make a dark superhero movie, you can go that route with different characters, like Alan Moore did with. Though Alan Moore saw it perfectly. He's like, if you want to go dark and go adult, I'm going to create a batch of characters just for
Yeah.
you, and to enjoy. And he wrote, a masterful story. And,
Watchmen, yeah. Well,
and
part of why Watchmen works is Alan Moore did create characters for that.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like you don't have to like take, Superman and the Flash and Wonder Woman and put them like in this totally dark world when the Justice League should be hopeful.
Well, and the biggest thing is I think that the one thing I give DC some grace, and where early on I was willing to overlook some things, and ultimately they just drove it into the ground. DC has a different expectation than Marvel for me in that DC is also carrying on a competition against itself. When you make a Superman movie now, not only do you have to be better than whatever's in the current marketplace, you're also competing with Chris Reeve, you're competing with George Reeves, you're competing with Tom Welling, Dean Cain, Brandon Routh. You're competing with a million different versions of Superman, right? Same thing with Batman, even Wonder Woman. You're competing with the Linda Carter version that's so ingrained for folks. Marvel kind of got the fresh palate cleanse of when you put Iron Man out there for the general public, Robert Downey Jr. is it. He's the end all be all. There is no other version to compare it to. DC kind of carried that burden of some of these characters have been around before. And so the thing is where that's harder though, and is when you make a bad version, it's very apparent. When you put a Batman who's trying to murder Superman with a spear for 2.5 hours, you're like, man, this is compared to Keaton,
Yeah,
compared to Adam West, compared to Bale, right?
yeah,
It really stands out. And then, the other part that just makes it so hard with the DCEU failing, seeing how well the animated universe did this just like a few years before. How
yeah,
perfectly, Tim and Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and those brilliant creators involved with all those, how well they understood the characters and they could create stuff like Batman the Animated Series that was
yeah.
dark, that told some serious stories, but also had fun and was vibrant and was colorful and made you want to watch the next episode. Whereas the DC, I don't know about you, Mike, but like for me, when I watched Batman versus Superman, I was just drained afterwards.
It
And
was
it's like
heartbreaking.
I don't know what I just saw.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the Justice League too. And then
oh,
then there was the whole thing where like, okay, well, that wasn't the real cut. And I've been meaning to give this that Zack Snyder cut another watch, but Jackson and I enjoyed watching the Snyder cut, and but the thing about it is that the moment was lost, and like now we're on this downhill
yep.
side of comic book movies, and DC just never got there. It never really caught. And to what your point, what you were saying is the animators, if they've been put in charge of some of these film products, I think it could have gone a lot better if they would have had, if they would have had a ringmaster like Feige, over
Mhm.
there, and kind of guided the projects. I think they would have been a lot more successful. But I think studio and the bean counters, oh, well, we got to capture this director, and let's let him do this, and let's get this writer to write a script because they're hot and upcoming. you
Yeah.
know it wasn't necessarily the best formula that they could have had. Whereas if they would have had more of a master plan in place, and had people that were truly like Bruce Timm, who were like truly experienced with the characters, cared about them, and could have put together some more cohesive ideas. They really could have taken the characters and made better and more successful films.
Well, I think the hard part too is, one of the things Marvel was great at is when something hit, Marvel knew and they escalated that. I don't know how big a plan Guardians of the Galaxy was.
Yeah,
I have to imagine if the first movie hadn't made a lot of money, they may not have been as intricately involved. But as soon as it hit, Marvel was like, sequel. Let's get it out. Let's put these characters in more things.
yeah,
DC was so weird as, Aquaman was by far the biggest hit money wise. It made over 1 billion. I believe it's the highest grossing DC film. Might have been passed by Joker, but and yet that came out in 2018. We're in 2023. Aquaman's just about to release its sequel. 5 years in between movies. Five, like, that's the thing is like this Aquaman's not tracking well. It's like because a lot of people have forgotten the
yeah,
first one. And in all honesty, the superhero craze has died. And it's like, you look at Marvel where they were brilliant, right? Iron Man 1 comes out in 2008. They got Iron Man 2 out by 2010. Tony Stark's on your screen again in 2012, again in 2013. Like in 5 years, Iron Man, because he hit, you saw him 4 or 5 times. DC, it's like, hey, Aquaman, everybody really liked that. Yeah, let's put her on the shelf for 4 or 5 years and go make a Harley Quinn. I mean, I think Harley Quinn, and I know she's a popular character, but like Suicide Squad was trashed, didn't make, made good, decent money, but it was absolutely savaged by critics and fans. Birds of Prey bombed at the box office, and they still put her in a third movie before Aquaman got a sequel. And it's like they had where they just could not pick the right moment of like as soon as Aquaman was such a success, you green light that thing. You get a sequel out. This is one of the rare hits you've had. Instead, it was like, we're gonna wait 4 or 5 years, kind of let it sit there. Maybe we'll do a spin-off movie. It just they never knew how to strike while the iron was hot. And I think the
They
other thing
kind of,
is,
I think they kind of got in their own way, you know. I
yeah,
think there was a lot of money talk and a lot of rethinking and overthinking that killed the good projects, and a lot of green light to creators who weren't really invested in the comics that just, put out, subpar material and kind of killed the DCU. It was
no,
sad.
I think the saddest thing is, we're going to go through this 20-year period of superhero films that seems to be ending. And the saddest part is we really got maybe a handful of good DC films
Yeah,
instead of, you're going to go through this golden age of superhero films, and we got maybe five good DC movies. And
yeah,
Marvel got, 20 plus
yeah. They
really
really
solid films.
they
Uh,
were just hitting home runs every time.
and it's so sad in that I think it's, and you talked about how Marvel used to be chasing DC. I think the saddest thing, and I think we've mentioned this on other videos, but there's so many DC characters who were first in the comics that now
Yeah,
because Marvel was so prevalent,
yeah.
my kids will see the character and they're like, oh, like the Snyder Cut. We watched that, and my 14-year-old, his first reaction was like, well, oh man, that's a blatant Thanos ripoff when they showed Darkseid. It's like, no, like Darkseid was first, man. But like Marvel got to the gates first. I think I mentioned this before. I watched Black Adam. My kid's like, well, Doctor Fate's a ripoff of Doctor Strange, and Hawkman's exactly like Falcon. Adam Smasher looks exactly like Ant-Man, and this Cyclone girl, she's just like Storm. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, Marvel got there first. And I think, culturally, what's interesting is even as Marvel goes down the drain a bit right now, they had such a cultural significance. I think for so many kids who are now that age, they'll always look back fondly on these Marvel films.
Oh
They'll
yeah.
be when they're in their 30s, they'll see Iron Man on TV and be like, man, that's back when sitting down with their kids, like, man, let me tell you about when comic book movies used to be.
Yeah. When they were coming out, it's like, that was the theme for my kid's birthday party. Like
Yeah,
his third or fourth birthday, but it was Iron Man, and he
yeah,
had the suit, and he was like repulsor blast, and then we could watch on, we were watching
movie.
Avengers was on the animated Avengers was on, and we would watch that, and then it was good times.
One, I think the saddest part kind of for us, I think, is DC fans, and I'm sure Mike, you kind of agree on this. The Batmans and the Supermans of the world, they'll be fine.
Yeah,
There'll always be Batmans and Superman movies. I think as a DCU fan, where I'm sad, and while Batman's my favorite character, there's so many DC characters I love, who just aren't going to get a shake.
yeah,
We're probably not going to ever get to see Martian Manhunter on screen.
I know.
We're probably not going to get a big screen Green Arrow. Hal Jordan and Green Lantern, probably not getting another shot. For you, I know the Flash. They kind of botched their approach there, and there's so many JSA characters and things that I think DC could have touched on. The Titans, the Teen Titans, getting to see them brought to life. Um, there's so many missed opportunities, and unfortunately, the Batmans and the Supermans, they'll probably be fine. I imagine we'll always get a Batman, always get a Superman. Every decade or so, they might boil up some new character. But where I'm always jealous of Marvel fans, and it's weird because I am a Marvel fan, but not to the level of DC. They got to see all their comics realized.
Yeah,
They got to see the Avengers in full on display as a team and as a
and
DC.
done well,
Yeah.
and done well.
No, and they get to go back and watch those movies and enjoy them and things like that. In DC, it's like, was there a Justice League movie? And I'm like,
Eh, and it's can you imagine like what the Justice League would have looked like had we had gone back to the Batman trilogy and we had Gal Gadot come in there and that Batman
yeah.
be paired up with her, and you just think of what could have been, and it's kind of like.
Oh no, I mean the single biggest one that what if I'll always have. Um, and
And
I
Jason
know
Momoa is, if you had that Aquaman and that Batman and that Wonder Woman together, what could have happened, you
yeah,
know?
no, I mean the biggest what if I'll always have is like, and I know it probably never would have happened because Nolan was very clear on my Dark Knight trilogy as its own thing.
Yeah.
Man, had they been able to pull Christian Bale and bring that
Yeah.
Batman into a DC universe.
And it had a good writer, like,
Where it's
who would you
interesting that
who would you have picked to be the writer for, like, if you could go back and rewind and redo the
I put
DCEU?
someone in charge.
Yeah,
Um,
would you have picked?
man, a
And
singular guy. I mean, it's just, I think they got the right guy now with James Gunn, but I don't know back then if you could have trusted that. To me, I would have pulled Bruce Timm. I would have pulled the anime. I know animation's different. I'd have pulled Deanie and Tim, and I'd have said, "Hey, look, gentlemen, like, do you think you?" And maybe they would have turned him down, but do you guys think you could translate even a portion of what you've had on the small screen with these cartoons and bring it to life?
or at least like whiteboard,
Yeah,
a diagram,
yeah.
like
Because the thing is,
Feige.
like, Feige's not a director, right? Feige's the game plan guy. I think if you could have sat Bruce Timm and Deanie,
Yeah,
clearly they
yeah.
crafted a universe of these films. I just sat them down and like, gentlemen, hey, you guys are in charge. What do you think we could do with this universe? How would because what I'll always give Justice League, they did such a good job in the cartoon of introducing characters and making you like new characters. The way they folded that team together, and it's interesting in that like the original Justice League before it turns into Justice League Unlimited, it's a very small team. You kind of had you had Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, you've got Flash, but you had John Stewart's Green Lantern instead of Hal, and you had Hawk Girl instead of Hawkman and Martian Manhunter. But they made that work and they made you get so invested in those characters. I think it just would have been interesting to see if they
I
had
could
had a
just
shot.
I could just see the bean counters and the suits at Warner Bros. Saying, "No, that those
No, cartoon.
animation guys, they
Yeah.
don't know what they're doing. That'll never work. I got this hot new director. Let's put him in charge." And it was just, yeah.
Well, no, it'll always be a missed opportunity. And I think, the saddest part is I do think the Dark Knight trilogy, I think, did play a role in why DCEU didn't work. In that while Marvel was growing their brand, DC's best character was tied into a trilogy that could never connect outside of its own because Nolan was always going to do his own thing. He was never going to tie into it. And so DC was kind of handcuffed as far as like, we want to do this rival universe, but by far our most bankable character, we have to let his story finish with Nolan. And by the time Nolan was done, the first Avengers movie had come out and it was kind of game set match by that point. I mean, I think DC could have saved themselves, but after that point, they were just chasing. And what I will say, I'm actually very grateful that it turned out that Nolan's trilogy didn't connect to it because that kind of gets to exist in its own bubble. I think those are three almost perfect movies. I can always go back and watch those. Those are untouched by the
You
mess
know,
of the DCEU, and they kind of get to exist as a well done thing.
the cool thing about those movies is, you typically see, you know, a sequel like diminish, by 50%. You get
Yeah.
to the third one, and it's like it's only as a third as good as the original one.
Mhm.
Those three, you could I could come in on a Sunday afternoon and be in the middle of Batman Begins and enjoy it just as much as like any of the other two movies. The other two movies, they're interchangeable. They're all so good.
Yeah. Oh, and
I,
I think it stands out in that like you see what happens when you get a director with a clear vision. And I think that's ultimately what failed DC is they never had a clear vision. They were
nah,
chasing Marvel. They overreacted to Eddie's slight failure, where it was like, people didn't like that. Scrap everything. And
yeah,
it's just sad. I think that's ultimately if to kind of close it out, my thoughts on the DCEU as a fan. And I'll be honest, I'm excited to go see Aquaman too. I don't know if it's going to be great, but I'm excited.
I
I'll
know.
always, anytime they throw a DC character in a movie,
I
I'm
saw the trailer last night.
audacious and
Godzilla.
nervous, but I'm always excited.
Yeah,
But ultimately, the saddest thing for me of DCU is like if people, what did you think of it? It just saddens me. It saddens me that so much potential, so many great characters, so many storylines got turned into what it got turned into. I heard someone use this analogy, but it's kind of like if you handed somebody hamburger meat, a bun, and cheese, and somehow they came back and handed you something that wasn't a hamburger and tasted awful. You'd be like, how did you mess that up? Like, you had those three ingredients. Like, there's no way you should have been able to screw this up. And that's kind of the DCEU where it's like you had well cast actors, you had big budgets, You had a template with Marvel of like, here's what good superhero movies can look like. And somehow it was like, nope, we're doing our own thing. And man, they drove that train off the tracks and just kept letting that thing fly. And they
You would have
never got
thought,
it
like,
back.
after the first stinker or two, you could have turned it around and go, nah, maybe, but no, they just kept driving that
I
way.
think for me, the inexcusable moment that just marked the failure, and I know Snyder has a lot of fans.
Yeah,
After Batman versus Superman, how they went to Zack Snyder and said, "We said do Justice League." Batman versus Superman should have been the end for Snyder. Should have been, look, I get it. We gave you this off of Man vs. Steel. We thought you'd make it successful, and I know Batman versus Superman made a pretty good chunk of change, but come on, you put the two most iconic superheroes in all of fiction on screen at the same time. Of course, it made money.
yeah,
But when Batman versus Superman got outgrossed 2-1 by the Avengers, that should have been the thing of like, hey man, yeah, you're done. Instead, they took their biggest film and they handed it to Snyder with Justice League. And then even halfway through Justice League, they kind of decided, oh no, this isn't a good idea. And then we got this aborted Joss Whedon cut that they put in theaters that just didn't work. And it will always fill me with such sadness that so many great characters and great actors. I think that's the other hard part is like Henry Cavill was a good Superman.
he
He
was.
gets,
Was.
like I'm not his biggest fan, but Ben Affleck, the dedication he put into looking like Batman, bulking himself up, knowing the character, how much you could tell he cared. That he gets looped in with this failure. It really sucks for those guys because man, they busted their butt and
Yeah.
they don't even get the reward of it. But let us know what you think below. What did you think about the DCEU? Why do you think it fell off the tracks and failed? And as always, we love seeing engagement from you guys. So if there's something you think we missed or stuff like that, if you could go back, who would you have put in charge of the DC universe? And ultimately, Mike, and we'll probably do a video on this next, but do we have any hope for James Gunn? Do we think he can actually do a reboot and get it to be successful? So we'll probably talk about that. But as always, folks, thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoy it. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great rest of your day, a happy holiday season, and we will see you in our next video.